This is Peter Cowie, talking about one of the cinema's supreme masterpieces, Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. Like many Europeans of my generation, I was overwhelmed by the ferocity and candor of Bergman's vision. After a childhood spent watching Tarzan movies at my local theatre, deep in England's West Country, here I was confronted by a man who put up on the screen all his fears and hopes, his dreams and his nightmares. Bergman never lays much stress on his credit sequences. He likes to get them out of the way as soon as possible. Nothing must distract from the essence of the film itself. Yet in this simple roll call are some of the most famous names in the Swedish cinema, made famous, of course, by Bergman's own triumph around the world. As in all his films of this period, these titles are set in a very gaunt, bare type, as though he wants to remind us of the sober quality of the vision he has. Erik Nordgren's music score, which was strongly influenced by Carl Orff's Carmina Burana and other medieval chants, surges up at us in this opening shot of a sea eagle floating balefully above us hapless mortals. A quote comes from the Book of Revelations, the final book of the Bible, in which the apocalypse is foretold.
Och när lammet bröt det sjunde inseglet.
This entire opening sequence was made in the summer of 1956 on location at Hovshalla in the southernmost province of Sweden, not far from Malmö, where Bergman had a permanent job as director at the municipal theatre. Here we see Max von Sydow as the knight Antonius Block, and Gunnar Björnstrand as his squire Jöns. Both men have returned from the Crusades. The Crusades lasted for more than 2 centuries, a series of military expeditions undertaken by the Christian powers of Europe to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims. The knight and his squire have managed to survive both the journey and the campaign, but like any veterans, they are scarred for life. Note how Bergman, in a few skillful shots, establishes A, that we're in the Middle Ages, and B, that these people have somehow emerged, welled up almost from the beginning of the world. Very often he'll open a film in this way. The beginning of Shame, for example, or the first shots of Through a Glass Darkly when the 4 characters wade ashore from the sea. It sort of clears the board, making the film a tabula rasa on which Bergman can build his ideas. We, the audience, shed our preconceptions of the movie. We now come to the first example of Bergman's dramatic use of sound effects. This stems in large measure from his background in the theatre. Note how we hear the sound of the surf pounding on the morning shore, and how as the knight passes the chessboard, such a vital symbol in the film to come, there is a cunning dissolve, the sound is faded out, and death is standing there. This immediate and dramatic diminishing of the noise of the sea creates a kind of miraculous effect, so that we and audiences wherever I've seen the film around the world accept this introduction of death.
Jag är döden. Kommer du för att hämta mig?
Jag har redan länge gått vid din sida.
Det vet jag.
Of course, the actor Bengt Ekerot's makeup here is taken directly from the vision of death that we find in the medieval frescoes in Swedish churches, where Bergman as a boy used to go with his father, who was a chaplain to the royal court indeed. And the young director was tremendously impressed by these drawings. And so, throughout The Seventh Seal, there are tableaux and images which evoke those medieval frescoes. Indeed, the whole story of The Seventh Seal is told on one 12-foot fresco in a church in southern Sweden. Here is one of the most famous of those fresco images, the knight representing life in the struggle with death across the board, challenging each other.
Du fick svart.
Det passar ju bäst så. Intressant.
Bergman, though, is quick to bring us back to reality. And the scowl that the squire now gives to his master makes us aware of the other side of the seventh seal. That is, a down-to-earth, even cynical approach to life. An eat, drink and be merry for tomorrow we die simplicity that must have been engaging to people confronted by the ravages of the Black Death and by the long, weary campaigns of the Crusades. It's a balance that films like The Name of the Rose, to take a recent example, have also tried to maintain. The sea for Bergman always has feelings of liberty, release, almost dreaming. And when people ride inland, as the knight and his squire now do, they approach danger, uncertainty. Jöns comforts himself with bawdy verses and then drops into a serious, concerned reflection on what awaits them, the omens, the symbols that prefigure the end of the world.
Upp till sitter Herran, han är ganska fjärran, men din broder Satan möter du på gatan. Färjestad talar om järtecken och annan ruskighet. Två hästar hade ätit varandra under natten. På kyrkogården hade gravarna öppnats. De dödas lämningar låg kastade över platsen. Det var 4 solar på himlavallet igår eftermiddag.
And always this appalling heat and glaring sunshine beating down. We find it in The Seventh Seal and indeed in many other places in Bergman's work because he himself cannot abide bright sunlight. Now we come to one of the best cuts in all Bergman's work.
Kan du säga vägen till värdshuset?
Suddenly, there, the monk is dead. Totally unexpected. As the squire will tell the knight when he gets back on his horse, the man was most eloquent. Incidentally, that monk was played by Ove Svensson, who was a student at Uppsala University and assistant director on the movie. And Bergman sent him up to the commissary during the shooting with that makeup on him and took great delight in the loss of appetite that overcame the crew as they lined up for their food.
Jag skulle snarare vilja påstå att han var högligen vältalig.
Jaså?
Ja, vältalig. Men talet han höll var dystert. Det måste man säga.
Now we are introduced to the 3 wandering players, medieval ancestors of those troubadours, those travelling musicians who are still so popular in Scandinavia today. Mia, played by Bibi Andersson, Skat, played by Erik Strandmark, and Joff, played by Nils Popper, swatting a fly there. Although the subtitles translate their names as Joseph and Mary, that's not quite accurate, for Maria means Mary in Swedish and Mia is a diminutive of it. The same with Joseph. But one does not have to search too hard for interior meanings to relate them to the Holy Family, along with their baby son, the innocent Mikael, the child who will inherit the earth. And the third character, Skat, who's still asleep in the caravan, is a rascal and rather fancies himself as a lady killer. And here Nils Popper, coming out into the morning sunshine, revealed a new side to his talent in this film, because in the post-war years he had established himself as a knockabout comedian in various movies and was not regarded as an actor disposed to dramatic roles. It's remarkable that Bergman is able to bring out the best in actors who in other people's movies are not so hot. And Popper is a very good example because never again would he score such a triumph as he did in The Seventh Seal.
Tråkigt nog kan jag inte äta gräs. Kan inte du lära mig? Vi har lite knapet, förstår du. Men folk är inte så konstintresserade i den här landsändan.
Now comes the miraculous moment when Joff will stop juggling, turn, and Bergman, by holding and holding the shot, is able really to heighten the tension and as a result make credible this vision. A vision that in other hands would appear banal, of a holy, graceful lady leading an infant across the lawn. Such images would be startling in another film director's work, but in Bergman, with his religious upbringing, they fit more naturally into context.
Mia, vakna! Vakna, Mia! Jag har sett något som jag måste berätta.
Bibi Andersson, there being rather irritable at being woken up, was really launched by this film. She and Bergman, very much in love in 1956, made their life together in Malmö, and during the years of their relationship, Bergman produced some of his finest work: The Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, The Magician, Brink of Life, all starring her. Like so many Bergman actresses, Ms. Andersson was able to find roles abroad, as well as with other Swedish directors in the years ahead, and has become established as one of the finest performers of her generation. At this point, she incarnates Bergman's ideal blonde, comforting female type. Like Hitchcock, he's projected on screen an image of the perfect blonde, except that his actresses seem so much more accessible than Hitch's.
Överallt. I himlen och på jorden.
And this teasing quality in the relationship between Joff and Mia, the way Mia says she doesn't believe in Joff's visions, actually only heightens our feeling that he can see things beyond the range of ordinary mortals.
Kanske en sån verklighet som när du sa att fan själv stod och målade vagnshjulen röda och använde svansen till målarpensel.
It's interesting to note that The Seventh Seal won the special jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival in 1957.
Jag gjorde det för ni skulle tro på mina andra syner. De riktiga, de som jag inte hittat på.
Du ska hålla styr på dina syner du. Annars kan du bli betraktad som en fåne.
Bergman has always been rather surprised at the success of The Seventh Seal. It was really just a little film that I and my friends made one summer, he said, and obviously he's very touched that it seems to have reached people at a rather profound level.
Jag har inte sagt det en gång för alla att jag behöver sova på morgonen. Jag bett er. Bönfallet är väl ingenting hjälp. Därför säger jag nu tyst.
For those who claim, without having seen it, that The Seventh Seal must be a long, melancholy tract, then surely little moments like this must be a convincing answer.
Mikael.
Bergman is keenly aware of the bright, sparkling moments of life, and of their passing quality, that very transience, of course, heightening their beauty. The way he uses here the dappled sunlight on their faces and the pastoral setting stresses this sense of complete contentment.
Du med dina fantasier.
Jag har gjort en sång. Jag tänkte...
We notice the contrast between the words of this song and the more lewd imagery and wording of the squire's song as he rode along the hillside.
Det sitter en duva på liljekvist I midsommartider. Hon sjunger så fagert om Jesu Krist. I himmelen är...
As a matter of fact, with very few exceptions, like The Virgin Spring, for example, Bergman has directed totally from his own scripts. These are works of literature in their own right, and not surprisingly, they have been published and are widely available also in the United States. Here comes Scat, with his mask in the form of a skull, like something out of Hamlet when the prince confronts the skull of Yorick. And also reminding us that what we are watching, of course, is, if you like, a play within a play. Reminding us that we shouldn't believe literally in the images and makeup of the characters.
Vore det inte bättre att spela något oanständigt?
Jag tycker folk bättre om oss, är det roligare.
By some strange, magical quality, a scat will now turn to us and start addressing us, the audience. Bergman convinces us in a few seconds, in an almost uncanny way, that this really is death talking.
Betänk du dåre denna lag, din levnadstråd är mäkta svag. Kort är din dag. Kommer kvinnorna älska med den här kostymeringen? Jag bara frågar.
And Scat will hang it, that dreadful mask, on a branch. And it will remain there in the background, somehow threatening, overshadowing this wonderful happiness of Joff and Mia.
Joff,
Ja, vad är det?
stå alldeles stilla. Säg ingenting.
Jag är tyst som muren.
Jag älskar dig.
Now we come to the church scene. There's usually a groan among audiences when Bergman approaches a church. But of course, in this particular film, it's very relevant because the church was so important in the lives of people in the Middle Ages. And it was quite natural for a knight to visit the church and worship on his first day back in his native country. But the squire is not interested in that. He goes to the side chapel, where a painter is at work on his frescoes.
Varför håller du på med sådana klodderier?
Jag tänkte man skulle påminna folk om det faktum att de ska dö.
Blir de inte glada då?
Varför i helvete ska man alltid göra folk glada? Man kan ju skrämma dem lite ibland.
Då blundar de och tittar inte på din tavla.
Du kan tro de tittar. En dödskalle är mycket intressantare än ett naket fruntimmer.
Ja, när du skrämmer dem.
Ja, tänker de.
Och de tänker.
Blir de ändå räddare.
Kila galopp i fram på prästerna.
Det är inte min sak.
Bara måla din dödsdans.
And Jens, the squire, pretends not to be moved by all this, to be rather scornful of it. But in fact, the painter quickly guesses that his visitor is unnerved and starts describing the ghastly impact of the plague.
Otäckt.
Du skulle se bölden under en sjukes hals. Du skulle se hur kroppen dras samman så att lemmarna blir som rep av galenskap.
Ser illa ut?
Ja, det ser illa ut. Han försöker slita svulsten ur sin bädd. Han biter sönder sina händer.
The Black Death had arrived in Sweden in 1349, and according to Barbara Tuchman in her brilliant study of medieval Europe, A Distant Mirror, about a third of the country's population was killed by the plague.
Var målar där uppe för strunt?
Ja, nu är det märkliga det att de stackars människorna ser.
Here is a portent of the procession of flagellants that appears later in the film, the implications of which I'll be discussing further on. Processions of this kind were common. Although often sanctioned by the Pope, they helped to spread the deadly plague, even if the people participating felt that they were purging their guilt.
Jag har lite brännvin. Jag har druckit vatten idag. Jag blev en törstig som en kamel ute i ökensanden.
Jag tror du blir rädd i alla fall.
By comparison, the knight, with his ascetic attitude to life, heads straight for the main altar, looks at the anguished effigy of Christ on the cross, and then becomes aware of a priest in the small room to the side. He goes across to confess.
Jag vill bikta mig så uppriktigt jag kan. Men mitt hjärta är tomt. Och tomheten är en spegel.
Bergman was extremely proud at this juncture in the 50s of having almost discovered Max von Sydow, and rightly predicted that Max would be snapped up by Hollywood and become a familiar face to generations of moviegoers.
Genom min likgiltighet för människorna har jag ställts utanför deras gemenskap.
Now he confesses all the burden, all the anxieties that have haunted him during those years abroad on the Crusades. And we, seeing this priest turn in the background, realize perhaps that he is death. But the knight does not, yet. And he keeps asking those questions about the meaning of life and death that so few filmmakers are dared to ask before The Seventh Seal, and that Ingmar Bergman has the writer's ability to encapsulate in pithy, rugged sentences.
Hur ska vi kunna tro på de troende när vi inte tror själva? Vad blir det av oss som vill tro men inte kan? Och vad blir det av dem som varken
These
vill
rhetorical questions drive him into a frenzy, so that he remains unconscious of the proximity of death.
Där inom mig på ett smärtsamt och förebyggande sätt, trots att jag förbannar honom och vill vräka ut honom ur mitt hjärta. Varför är han trots allt en jäckande verklighet som jag inte kan bli kvitt?
Now it is certain that it's death. But still the knight cannot see. He observes him from a different angle. Bergman's skill as a composer of images is manifest in this rather long-held shot within the confessional. You have the bars symbolically dividing the spirits of life and death. You have the imaginative lighting picking out the side of death's face and the side of the knight's face, with the blackness surrounding and enveloping them.
Människa kan leva med döden för ögonen och vetskapen om alltings intighet.
De flesta människor reflekterar varken över döden eller inte.
Men en dag står du ju ändå på livets yttersta näs och ser mot mörkret.
Ja.
And you have the turned away faces, and how often Bergman uses this device. When people never address each other directly, they keep their gaze averted almost from insecurity.
Du oroar dig.
Now, in a moment of irony, Death tries to trick the knight into revealing the nature of his mission.
Den fristen ger mig tillfälle att uträtta ett angeläget ärende.
Varför ett ärende?
Mitt liv har varit ett jagande, farande, talande utan mening eller sammanhang. Det har varit en intighet. Ja, jag säger det utan bitterhet eller självförebråelse. Eftersom jag vet att nästan alla människors liv är beskaffade på just det sättet. Men mitt uppskov vill jag använda till en enda meningsfull handling.
Därför spelar du schack med döden.
And then, of course, how he will try to outmaneuver
Han är
him
en svår
in the
och
chess
skicklig
game.
taktiker. Men än så länge har jag inte givit upp en enda pjäs.
Hur ska du kunna överlista döden i ditt spel?
Jag spelar i en kombination av löparen och springaren som man ännu inte har upptäckt. I nästa drag river jag upp hans ena flank.
Det ska jag lägga på minnet.
And now the knight realizes that he has been fooled.
Du är en förrädare.
But almost immediately, in a way characteristic of Bergman, the knight tells himself that he'll find a way out.
Jag ska nog finna en väg.
Vi möts vid värdshuset. Där ska vi spela vidare.
As Death leaves, the knight catches sight of his hand and looks at it and utters some of the most touching words in the entire film, a kind of credo, ending with the ringing phrase, I, Antonius Block, am playing chess with death.
Fortfarande högt på himlen. Och jag, Antonius Block, spelar schack med döden.
So back to Jöns and the painter, who are drowning their depression and mellowing a bit thanks to the liquor. And Jöns indulges in his by now familiar bitter comments about the Crusades.
I 10 år satt vi nere i det heliga landet, lät ormar hugga oss, flygfän sticka oss, vilddjur bita oss, hedningar slakta oss.
Some of this dialogue, with its double meanings and witty exchanges, is worthy of the writer Oscar Wilde. So let's just sit back and enjoy these next few exchanges.
Jag ska säga dig att vårt korståg var så dumt så bara en riktig idealist kunde funnit på det. Det där om pesten var otäck. Är det så? Tack, ja. Hur man vänder sig med rumpan bak. Stor sanning. Rumpan bak. Rumpan bak. En djup sanning. Här ser du vävnan Jöns. Han flinar åt döden, flabbar åt herren, skrattar åt sig själv och ler mot flickorna. Hans värld är en jönsvärld. Trovärdig för ingen utom
And now the knight will enter and introduce again this note of soberness and confiscate the picture. Ernst scowls, but follows his master obediently, as Sancho Panza follows Don Quixote. Outside the church, a young woman is tied, condemned, ready to be taken to the stake. Superstition was rife in Europe at that period because of the terrible scourge of the Black Death. Everybody believed in the devil, and it was very convenient to single out in society one person who had had a vision or a dream of some kind, and then condemn them, and in doing so, free all the others in the village or the community from any risk of death.
Den onde fördrar inte lukten.
Inte jag heller.
The knight addresses the first of his questions to this innocent woman. Have you seen the devil?
Du ska inte tala till henne.
He needs to know. He thinks that somewhere in her gaze there lies the answer to this problem of existence. And she turns and will utter this single, strange, almost baby-like wail that cuts to the core. And look at that shot with the knight-at-arms, legs apart, barring the way in an image of crude, implacable brutality. And so the knight and his squire resume their journey. And Ernst keeps up the spirits with a bawdy song as always.
Måste du sjunga?
Nej.
Everywhere, deserted villages. People have fled on account of the plague. Some people groan at the prospect of seeing another Bergman movie. They associate him with gloom and doom. He certainly hasn't been the best ad for the Scandinavian tourist boards, but he has no regrets about working his special area over and over. Ladies used to approach Chopin after his recitals, Bergman told me, and say, "Oh, Monsieur Chopin, why do you keep composing all those lovely nocturnes? What about an opera or a symphony?" To which Chopin replied, "Madame, my kingdom is a small one, but I am king there." The squire enters this barn. Suddenly catches sight of a corpse. And then hears movement. And note here how the costumes and set dressing by P.O. Lundgren are so skillfully designed and prepared that we never once doubt that this really is a medieval story. And this character coming into frame is Raval, the seminarist. A seminarist was slightly below a priest in the hierarchy of the medieval church, but still had a strong hold over the population. And then the young woman, who does not utter a single word throughout the film, indeed is unnamed. Only at the final moments of the film will she say her first and last words. Played by Gunnel Lindblom, who became famous later as the erotic sister in The Silence, she was working with Bergman at Malmö Municipal Theatre, where, among other things, she was a marvelous Marguerite to Max von Sydow's Faust in a stage production.
Det är inte rätt att förvåna sig över.
Jag känner igen dig, trots att det var länge sedan.
And Ernst mocks Raval with all the loathing that comes from 10 years of fighting and travelling, which he knows men like Raval urged on his master. These functionaries of the church always get a bad mark in Bergman's book, are always presented as ugly, grafting individuals, trading on the gullibility of the ordinary people. And note how, very often in Bergman, one character accuses the other, and the person who's being accused turns the face away.
Vi har det för bra. Vi är för nöjda. Herren vill tukta vårt belåtna högmod. Därför sände han dig. Du spydde ditt himmelska ätter och förgiftade riddaren.
And once again, in a small scene like this one coming up, as Ernst threatens Raval, we can observe how Bergman, by cutting, achieves a shock effect.
Syssla denna värld för uslingar och skorkar. Har jag inte rätt?
Replay this sequence again, and you'll note how all the terror is aroused by cutting away to the girl's face just at the moment that the squire would slash Raval's throat with his knife. In fact, not a drop of blood is spilt, but the impact is there due to the ferocity of the editing. Like most major directors, of course, Bergman is very difficult to contact, and especially so during the 50s, when I was trying to reach him as a young film critic. I finally met him through a friend at a press conference, and he was most charming and very, very modest, even shy, about his own achievement.
Jag kunde ha våldtagit dig. Och så medan jag är trött på den sortens kärlek. Det blir lite torrt i längden. När jag tänker på saken ska vi behöva en hushållerska. Lagar bra mat. Jag är visserligen gift, men jag har gott hopp om att min fru ska vara död vid det här laget. Så jag behöver en hushållerska. Kom då för satan, sånt där Klo. Jag har räddat dig från döden så du skyller mig åtskilligt.
In a nearby village, Joff and Mia are performing with scat for the local people. The symbolism seems very heavy and crowded, but in fact Bergman wants with this scene merely to show what a rotten life the entertainer has, always parading and looking foolish before his public, always being humiliated. And he told me that that's what he dreaded about opening nights in the theatre, waiting for the audience reaction. For people like Joff and Mia, this is a way of earning a living, trying to bring a little pleasure into humdrum, everyday life. This is the smith with his sledgehammer, and he and his libidinous wife, Lisa, shown there, emerge as important minor figures in this drama. But this part of the show doesn't prove too popular with the villagers. One of the soldiers pelts Scat, who promptly retreats in mock fury. But he's about to be amply consoled while Joff and Mia embark on their next number, as we'll see. This song has references to the plague, with lines like "the black one dances on the shore" and so on. And of course we do think of death. But Joff and Mia make fun of such things in order to survive. And while we go on hearing the song off screen, and it provides a nice and witty counterpoint to what we're about to see, Lisa begins her long and delicious seduction of Scat. And Scat, vain like many Bergman male characters, prepares himself in the mirror, and Lisa prepares her lunch.
Bocken väser med tänderna två. Blåsten är tung och vågen slår.
And starts eating her chicken long before Albert Finney and Joyce Redmond did just that in Tom Jones.
Hästen sitter i trädet och gal.
In The Seventh Seal, Bergman is seeking to establish a gallery of characters, each of whom represents a different type of human personality. Each will meet his end in a different way, but each strikes some chord of recognition among us. And this lustiness, this bawdiness, which we see in a scene of this kind, is actually very much a part of Bergman's own personality. For example, when he was shooting Summer with Monica on an island outside Stockholm, he fell in love with Harriet Anderson, and in order to stay on the island even longer than they should have done, he scratched the negative of the rushes that were being sent back to Stockholm. And when the lab reported that new film had to be made, Bergman was delighted and said we have to stay another week and another week after that. So I think that this is a very much an image of himself, just as much as the serious and graver side of the personality we see in the rest of The Seventh Seal. But the musical number ends with Joff and Mia suddenly aware of the procession of flagellants. And this terrible chanting comes onto the soundtrack. Such processions did take place in history, no doubt about it, but Bergman heightens their reality. What he's doing here, of course, is giving flesh and blood to those scenes we saw on the walls of the church earlier. By any standards, it's a stunning sequence, brilliantly shot, brilliantly edited, and exemplifying the extraordinary power that the church wielded over the population in Europe at that time. And Bergman's own childhood was terribly cruel in this respect, and I think in such scenes he is purging himself and paying back a kind of revenge on that childhood, where those of you who've seen Fanny and Alexander will remember the terrible punishment meted out to the children by the very strict bishop. And that only took place at the beginning of the 20th century. So Bergman's feeling is that this very strong disciplinarian attitude of the church has continued up to our own times. Note how Bergman keeps the camera alternately rigid or on the move. This could so easily be theatrical, but Bergman transcends the boundary between stage and screen to a remarkable and mysterious degree. The knight and the squire and his girl watch along with the other villagers, who fall to their knees in respect for this appalling procession. For many years, The Seventh Seal was the most popular foreign film on the campus non-theatrical circuit in the US, and seems to have been the perfect vehicle for film teaching. And now the monk appears, played by Anders Ek, one of Sweden's greatest post-war stage actors, with his twisted mouth and riveting gaze, most impressive when mocking and haranguing people. It's the sort of role Laurence Olivier would have gobbled up in his prime. Talking in a low, even voice, and then suddenly exploding with fury, transfixing the crowd.
Döden står bakom min rygg. Jag kan se hur hans hjässa blänker i solen. Hans lie blixtrar när han höjer den bakom mina huvuden.
Not at all the gentle image of the monks that we have from our childhood history books.
Du där, så det blygar som en get. Ska din mun innan kvällen förvridas. En sista oavslutad.
All this talk of death mind you, upset many people when the film first appeared. And I remember seeing it at the bottom half of a double bill in London. And my grandmother was with us. And halfway through the movie, she stood up and in a loud voice declared, "There's too much talk about death in this film. I'm going back to prepare the supper," and stalked out of the cinema. But my father and I stayed up half the night talking about the movie. And I think that it did have that effect on a great many people of my generation. These were the sort of images we hadn't seen before.
Hör ni vad jag säger? Hör ni ordet? Dömda, dömda, dömda! Förbarma dig över oss i vår förnedring.
And the skull again appears. That symbol that appears everywhere, as indeed does the twisted wooden effigy of the Saviour on the cross. And so the procession begins again. These people genuinely believed that by lashing themselves and punishing themselves, they would somehow drive away the evil one. By a series of cuts and dissolves, note how Bergman suggests that they pass away across this barren ground and seemingly vanish into it until nothing is left except the bare earth.
Detta jävla undergångssnack. Ska vara föda åt moderna människor. Fordrar de verkligen att vi ska ta dem på allvar? Ja, nu flinar du åt mig, herre.
The squire is always more down to earth than his master and refuses to accept the dogma of the church.
Ja. Se, de är spökhistorierna om Gud Fader, änglarna, Jesus Kristus och den heliga Ande har inhämtat utan större sinnesrörelser. Ha!
And here's Smith. Plog is his name. And he's lost his wife, of course, who ran off with Scat among the bushes. There are a few more engaging pairs of characters in Bergman than Plog and Jörns. No intellectual pretensions in either of them, but the squire is able to run rings around the smith. In the tavern nearby, people make merry, but also chatter away with great anxiety about the plague and its significance, just as people have always talked, and as people talk now in the wake of Chernobyl and with the scourge of AIDS. In the 50s, when the Seventh Seal was made, the main concern was the Cold War, and for those who saw the film at that time, then this situation must have struck a certain chord, with relations between the superpowers at their worst since World War II, and with a sense of nuclear catastrophe being literally just around the corner. Bergman never stresses the parallel, but it was there, and it was noted by the reviewers and picked up by audiences. But the film is great enough and resilient enough to transcend that particular era, so that a new generation can enjoy it now without any knowledge of the 50s and the preoccupations of that period. And many of these characters in the tavern were picked at random by Bergman from an old people's home near Malmö, and he cunningly intermingles them with the professional actors to create a series of memorable portraits. Again, the reference to Judgment Day and the Apocalypse. Now poor Joff starts to get into trouble. He's minding his own business, enjoying some chicken, when Raval overhears what Plog is saying to him.
Stuckit iväg med en skådespelare. En skådespelare? Har så dålig smak så tycker jag du ska låta henne löpa. Du har alldeles rätt. Min tanke var förstås närmast att jag skulle slå ihjäl henne. Nästan på det viset. Mörda henne, ja, det är en helt annan sak. Jag ska slå ihjäl skådespelaren också. Skådespelare? Ja visst, den som hon har rymt med.
Varför det?
And with that terrifying knowledge, almost knowledge in advance, that all Bergman's villains seem to possess, he suddenly comes in from left field to suggest that Joff is responsible.
Du sitter här och ljuger för smeden.
Ja.
And Raval, of course, has spied Scat running off with the smith's wife. And now Raval sees a chance to torture somebody else to get his kicks.
Och det är väl din kumpan som snappat iväg med plogskärring.
Är du skådespelare du också?
In 1950, when a poll was taken in Sweden as to what parents would like their children to become, actors were bottom of the list. And Bergman loves quoting that and loves showing how actors are mocked and vilified in his films.
Vi skulle kanske märka det lite med kniven. Man gör med
Joff remains the innocent as always. And now he'll look around and realize that he has no friends in this tavern.
Tänker ni göra mig illa?
And start talking in his meek and honest manner.
Har jag retat någon eller suttit i vägen? Jag ska genast gå min väg och inte visa mig här vidare.
Res dig upp så att alla hör dig. Tala högre.
Stand on your head, actor, hisses Raval. And once again, the acting profession is mocked. Bergman had a fight with a critic once on the stage in Stockholm. The critic had given him a bad notice and started teasing Bergman from the stalls during a rehearsal. Bergman knocked him to the floor and was sued by the critic. But when he lost, said he was quite happy to pay damages because at least he'd justified himself and his fellow actors. And now Joff has to dance to the tune of the mugs being rammed down on the table. And note the cutting in this scene, on the beat all the time. It's as though he were being burnt at the stake, ritually. And the look in his face is similar to what we'll see soon when the witch is burnt at the stake in the forest. A look of helpless suffocation. But salvation arrives in the shape of the squire, who remembers that it was Raval who was robbing the dead in that deserted village. And he watches for a few seconds, and Joff collapses. And then the squire intervenes, and now he will carry out his threat and brand Raval for life.
Kommer du ihåg vad jag skulle göra med dig om vi möttes igen?
And note that the violence is reflected in the eyes of the squire. Bergman comes now to one of those charmed interludes, the most idyllic sequence in The Seventh Seal. The knight waiting beside his chessboard for death to appear, when he notices Mia with her little son. The briefness of the summer in Scandinavia, of course, means that films like The Seventh Seal have to be shot in a period of no more than 5 to 6 weeks, and are then edited during the fall, with the result that 9 out of 10 Swedish films, certainly, are premiered in the days before and after the Christmas holidays.
Vi spelade ju någon sorts teaterföreställning eftermiddag.
Tyckte att det var dåligt.
Du är vackrare nu när du inte så där målad i ansiktet. Den där klänningen klär dig bättre.
Tycker du? Ja, du förstår, Jonas Gata har stuckit iväg och lämnat oss. Så nu är vi i en riktig knipa.
Är det din man?
Jonas? Nej, den andra karln är min man. Han heter Joff.
Ja, så den.
Ja. Så nu är det bara han och jag. Ja, det blir till att börja göra konster igen. Och det är ett sabla besvär.
Gör ni konster också?
Ja, det kan du tro. Och Joff...
It's the end of the day. Mia is humble before the night.
Joff vill att han ska bli.
Inte du.
Jag vet inte. Han kanske blir riddare.
And she becomes worried when she sees the knight is so preoccupied.
Du ser inte glad ut.
Nej.
Är du trött?
Ja.
Varför det?
Jag
And in
tror...
that little remark, by the
Menar du
way,
din väpnad?
I'm in boring company, and who's that? She said,
Hur menar du?
myself. There's a little bit of introspection on Bergman's part, because he's always felt that his own
Jag förstår ganska
dialogue and high-flown philosophy is a bit too much for his own good. And now Joff returns from the tavern and needs brushing down and the medieval equivalent of tea and sympathy.
Snälla, jag har det gjort. Har du släppt? Kom och sätt dig här. Har du varit någonstans? Får se på dig,
Mia, of course, is used to it and thinks that he's just been drinking and boasting.
Du förstår.
Hej, jag söp inte det minsta.
Så att du vill skröt om dina änglar och jävlar som du umgås med. Folk tycker inte om dem som har för många idéer och fantasier.
Jag sa förbanna mig inte ett ord om änglar.
Jag vill gå och sjunga och dansa. Tänk att du aldrig kan låta bli att spela
She chides him gently, and he shows her the bangle that of course he stole as he dashed from the tavern. Pure silver, as Raval had said, which means undoubtedly that it's worthless.
Inte hade du råd med det?
Ja, nu gjorde jag det i alla fall.
Ja.
And he'll start exaggerating as usual. So Joff is by no means just a gentle revisionary.
Jag kom aldrig för. Arg blev jag, det skulle du tro. Jag röt som ett lejon. Ja.
Blev de rädda?
Nej, då bara skratt.
And then he'll catch sight of his son, and that will restore his spirits. In another film of Bergman's, The Silence, made in 1963, a small boy, a little older than this, symbolizes the hope of the human race. And perhaps Mikhail, too, in this film, suggests the idea of the carrying on of a race, even if everybody else dies. Joff bows reverentially to the knight. And Bergman's is indeed a class cinema, in the sense that there are the lower orders and the higher orders of people, not just in terms of social class, but in terms of mental ability, spiritual ability, and each seems to recognize the other. And Mia goes off to fetch the milk and the strawberries. And Joff and the knight begin to discuss the next stage of the journey, and these lines are important.
Jag skulle avråda från en sån resa.
Varför det? Om man får fråga.
Pesten går den vägen. Följer kusten söderut. Det sägs att människor dör i 10 000-tal.
Aj. Ibland skapar minsann till som ett besked.
Får jag föreslå att ni följer mig genom skogen i natt? Så kan ni stanna på min gård om ni vill, eller följa östra kusten. Där är ni antagligen säkrare.
Det är skogsmultron. De växer där uppe i backen. Jag har aldrig sett så stora.
And notice how the gestures and the very hushed quality of this scene have an almost church-like quality, as though the milk and the strawberries were involving a ritual, some kind of open-air communion, the taking of a sacrament. The skull still swings on its branch in the background, you'll see, in the top left-hand corner of the frame, still reminding us of death.
Jag har blivit sällskapets direktör när allt kom omkring.
Jag har blivit sällskapets direktör.
And they are quite cheerful by the time the squire arrives with his girl to complete this family, as it were.
Slå ner mina vänner och låt oss vara tillsammans.
And with the white cloth spread out on the hillside, they begin to join together in a simple, unaffected celebration of the good things of life. Strawberries mean a great deal to Bergman, as they do to all Swedes. They're the perfect symbol of summer, and Bergman even named his next film Wild Strawberries. And in Summer Interlude, made in 1951, there is a very moving sequence where the two lovers share some strawberries on a remote, idyllic island. And Bergman balances the bawdy wit of the squire against the more serious overtones of this scene. And Joff will fetch his lyre, his medieval instrument that was so popular in those days. And the night becomes philosophical. And now a chance remark of Mia's reminds the knight of his wife, and he stares out beyond the frame, preoccupied with those memories. And Bergman's composition is so subtle, the way the knight creates a scent of space by gazing out leftwards, and Joff and the skull are up at the edge of the frame, and Bibi Andersson as Mia in the middle between.
Jag skrev sånger till hennes ögon, hennes näsa, hennes allra som vackraste små öron. Vi gick på jakt tillsammans. På kvällarna dansade vi, huset var fullt av liv.
Ska du ha lite smultron?
And the night is filled with nostalgia. But then, surrounded by this happiness and this gentleness and this open air, he begins to embark on what really amounts to a credo. And as I've said, the whole scene has something of the air of a church communion. And the strawberries replace the holy wafer, and the bowl of milk replaces the holy wine.
Skål med smultron, skål med mjölk. Era ansikten i kvällsljuset. Mikael som ligger och sover. Joff med sitt strängaspel.
This then is what the knight will carry with him, something that will protect him and inspire him. And as he lifts the bowl of milk, we note that he does so in exactly the same way as a worshipper does at the altar.
Och detta ska vara mig ett tecken. Och en stor tillräcklighet.
And he knows he must leave them and go back to continue the game with death. Note how Bergman changes the lighting whenever Death is around. It becomes harder. The dusk is now on the hillside, and Death glides into the frame, his chalk-white features completely impassive. His eyes seem to stare out as though through a skull. There are only 3 scenes in The Seventh Seal where we see the chess game in actual progress. This is the second one.
Det är ditt drag. Varför ser du så nöjligt? Det är min hemlighet. Självfallet. Nu slår jag din springare. Det gjorde du rätt i. Har du lurat mig? Ja, visst. Du gick i fällan.
The knight is momentarily elated because he's tricked Death. Save your king, he says.
Du är ganska övermodig.
Death knows that the knight is trying to protect Joff and Mia, but he senses that this holy family, as it were, will be more difficult to kill than his usual victims. And it's a theme that runs through Bergman's cinema, this idea of a complete simplicity being a protection against the fear of death and evil. And many critics of Bergman's work have reproached him, saying that just to paint the most virtuous of people as being the most simple and uncomplicated is not necessarily particularly profound. So as they mount up to leave, the squire finds Plog blubbering in a corner of the tavern. And they settle down together almost like 2 TV comedians. And here in simple medium shot, Bergman films one of the wittiest passages in The Seventh Seal. Watch the dialogue carefully.
Ja, det är ett helvete med kvinnor och ett helvete utan kvinnor. Så vi bara resonerar ändå med slågus och slå ihjäl dem, men det är som roligast.
Kärringtjat och svinmat.
Barnskrik och pissblöjor.
Vassa naglar och spydigheter.
Hugg och slag och fans moster till svärmor.
Så när man ska lägga sig och sova.
Blir det en ny melodi?
Tårar, gnäll och jämringar i himlens höjd.
Varför kysser de inte godnatt?
Varför sjunger inte en sång?
Varför älskar de inte som när vi träffades först?
Varför tittar den på min nya särk?
Bara vänder ryggen till och snarkar.
Fy fan.
Fy fan. Nu är hon borta. Väd dig.
This is Orca Fridell, one of Bergman's favourite actors at the time. He had a bit of a drink problem, and that made shooting on the Seventh Seal rather difficult, apparently. And Gunnar Björnstrand here, as the squire, was one of Bergman's greatest actors. He only died in 1986. And he'd had roles in more than a dozen Bergman movies, the last being Fanny and Alexander. At this stage, he was at his height, able easily to leap from high comedy to the most serious of performances. In many ways, he's the most appealing character in The Seventh Seal. Bergman, one feels, identifies with him more than with anyone else. In fact, the whole film is a conflict between two ways of approaching the world, the knight's idealism and the squire's hedonism.
Som är så oljad i käften och till och med tror på din egen rappakast.
Tror? Det man säger att jag tror. Men jag älskar till goda råd. Det är de ett så får genast två. Så jag egentligen studerat Karl.
Jans, jag kan få följa dig genom skogen. Jag är så ensam och vill inte gå hem för där skrattar alla åt mig.
Nej, bara du inte lipar hela tiden. Då löper vi ifrån dig.
Jans!
More comic business. These interludes are a stock in trade for Bergman, and like Shakespeare in his tragedies, he uses them to relieve the gloom. But also he changes the mood dramatically, and so quickly that one hardly notices it. So that just as he comes into close-up, we hear the sound of a bell tolling in the background. So now this perilous little procession moves out into the forest. And more the caravan of Joff and Mia comes to resemble an ark, bearing them safely through the darkness, away from the fear of death. There is no one who can escape death in Bergman's eyes, but the real trick lies in banishing the fear of death. And suddenly some more light relief. Plog espies his wife. Scat takes off. Plog glances at Lisa and then pursues the actor, determined to pound him into submission with that heavy hammer. And they confront each other beside the caravan and indulge in witty repartee, with the squire prompting the smith to give him the best lines. Not many European directors handle comedy as well as Bergman. And the dialogue here, and particularly in his previous film, Smiles of a Summer Night, really place him with directors like Lubitsch, or remind us of films like The Philadelphia Story or Ninotchka. Bergman has a remarkable collection of 16mm films and is something of a closet movie buff. But because he's one of the most famous faces in Sweden, he has to duck into a movie theatre a minute or two after the lights have gone down and then leave just before the end, because he might be recognized. But he does keep up with all the new releases. And we'll see how Lisa, the smith's wife, resorts to some old-fashioned feminine guile and subtly changes sides, sensing that there's a shift in the balance of power here, and that Plog has the squire, and by implication the knight, behind him, and that Scat may be a lost cause.
Skrattar du åt? Det här är ju högst allvarligt.
I de sydliga länderna finns det en sorts människoliknande djur som kallas apor.
Och vad är det med det då?
Ja, vad bara det.
Plog.
Now Lisa tries to make up with Clogg, and the squire, off stage as it were, anticipates how she's going to behave and tells Joff.
Om ett ögonblick börjar hon gråta.
Jag måste gråta, det är så hemskt allting. Och den där Ernan har lurat mig så förskräckligt så det kan du inte tro.
Kunigunda, om nu sanningen ska fram så...
Snart kommer talet om älsklingsrätterna, vänta bara.
Lille Plog, när vi kommer hem så ska jag laga kroppkakor åt dig med rotmos och lingon som är det bästa du vet. Inte sant, Lille Plog?
Ja, men först måste jag slå ihjäl honom där.
Ja, visst, slå ihjäl honom bara. Slå ihjäl honom riktigt ordentligt.
Tycker inte alls om honom längre.
And now the actor's in deep trouble and searches desperately in his professional repertoire for some way of escaping this situation. And comes up with the idea of stabbing himself, with a false knife, of course.
Kära Plog, om du trodde att jag skulle hålla något försvarstal för min så kallade verklighet så misstog du dig. Slå ihjäl mig bara. Jag kommer att tacka dig efteråt.
The actor plays on the emotions, as the squire says. And of course the gullible Smith swallows the gimmick.
Han måste ju slåss med, men han ska inte slå ihjäl honom. Han måste åtminstone reta upp mig så jag blir lika arg som nyss.
Note how Bergman's composition includes all the characters in the frame, even the silent girl up at the far left there and Mia to the right. It's a crowded composition, but there's a sense of an audience watching as Scat prepares to go to his death.
Jag förlåter dig, Kunigunda. Farväl, min vän. Bed för mig någon gång.
This is a joke within a joke in a way, because the actor thinks that he's fooled everybody, which he has, but he doesn't realize what's going to befall him in a few seconds' time. And Joff, knowing how it's done, has whispered to the squire.
Jag börjar ju tycka riktigt bra om honom. Han är död. Alldeles kolossalt död. Jag har nästan aldrig sett en sån död skådespelare.
Det är egentligen väldigt sorgligt det här. Fast han ville det ju själv, stackare.
I might mention here that Bergman has called The Seventh Seal an oratorio, in which several voices pose the same question. What is the meaning of life?
I största förtroende. Är inte livet ganska...
Jo, det är det. Men tänk inte på det nu.
Det är kolligt. Det är vad det är.
Nu är en bra scen.
A well-played scene, he says. He peels off his false beard and is born again as a snot-nosed, rather unimpressive character that he really is.
Så inga björnar, vargar eller spöken får tag i mig.
And death arrives to claim him. But one should comment really on that mask theme, because in many of Bergman's films, people wear masks in order to protect themselves against the surrounding world. And when they lose that mask, they're revealed as vulnerable, quivering human beings. And this is well illustrated, I think, in this scene.
Sen får vi till helgonfesten i Helsingör. Ska jag sjunga en liten sång för mig själv?
It's ironic, of course, that he should have pretended to stab himself to death only to be really dispatched a few moments later. We've talked about Bengt Ekeroth's makeup in the part of death, but I think we also ought to pay tribute to the relentless quality he brings to his performance. There's a matter-of-fact coldness about death. He's still able to indulge in banter. He's still able to answer back any of the desperate pleas that his victims throw at him. But really, he regards his job as a piece of work.
Min familj, mina barn.
Åh, fy skämskap.
Jag skäms. Finns det inga undanflykter?
Is there no exemption for actors? Rather ironic comment by Bergman.
Inte i det här fallet.
Although much of The Seventh Seal may strike one as being elaborately calculated, in the best sense of the term, there are moments when spontaneity takes over. And in fact, when they were shooting this scene, a funny thing happened as the tree was felled. A squirrel actually popped up and nibbled at the fresh-cut sawdust. Now the storm begins to blow and howl about them, and the cart looks fragile and rickety. And that beautiful insert shot reminds us of the work of Gunnar Fischer, the cinematographer who was Bergman's great associate at this time, and who, with the most restricted of resources, achieved wonders of clarity and contrasts of light and shade in these black and white Bergman movies of the 50s. Bergman is a great fan of the black and white movie, and in fact when color came in, he was reluctant to go over to the new technique for a long time. And then to the ringing tones of Erik Nordgren's music comes a party of soldiers taking the witch to the stake. Everyone has to help to try to get the wagon going again after it is stuck in the mud.
Var ska ni ta vägen?
Till brännplats!
Ja, du ser, det är hon häxan.
Why burn her at night when people need the diversion? Asks Jöns cynically.
Tyst för alla i helgon. Såna jävla mess överallt.
Då är herrarna således 8 modiga här.
Nå, man har fått betalt. Uppdrag var ju frivilligt.
And the knight rides into the foreground here, and after some scenes very much in the background of the action, he will come forward again. He's fascinated by the reappearance of the witch and goes with the party to the glade where she is about to be burnt to see if he cannot find some response to his questions. Again, the economy of the film is brilliantly suggested here. Bergman persuades us instantly that we really are in the depths of some forest. In fact, these scenes were shot on the backlot at Rosunda, the small studio of Svensk Filmindustri outside Stockholm, which was overlooked by the skyscrapers of social welfare Sweden. Bergman is always very meticulous in his choice and use of music, and indeed at one point told me that he wanted to be a conductor when he was a small boy. If he hadn't have been a filmmaker, he said, I would have been a conductor. There's something ruthless, something similar to Death's attitude. In the business-like way, the men-at-arms go about preparing their victim for the stake. And now the knight will try to speak to the witch through the bars, just as he spoke to Death through the bars of the confessional. And she does reply to him now. She's more lucid. But he thinks that she knows more than she really does know. And she replies with the simple, knowing looks that must have tantalized and infuriated her interrogators.
Han måste ju veta. Han om någon.
Du kan se honom när du vill.
Hur?
Men då måste du göra som jag säger. Se in i mina ögon.
Well, do you see him, she asks.
Ser du? Ser du honom?
Jag ser en still skräck i dina ögon. Ingenting annat.
Ingenting. Ingen.
Nej.
And he wheels
Står han
round.
inte bakom din rygg?
And in that moment, we too believe we are about to see something. That's Bergman's sorcery. He's able to manipulate us, the audience, into believing almost exactly what he wants us to believe.
Han är med mig överallt.
And the witch, realizing that she's got a good audience, begins to elaborate.
Hos mig nu också.
In fact, as the squire will say in a few moments' time, she is really just an ignorant young girl, unable, alas, to answer those questions the knight will always want to ask.
Prästen hade ingen svårighet att se honom, och inte knäktarna heller. De är så rädda för honom.
Bergman, incidentally, is a stern taskmaster. You don't say no to Ingmar when he offers you a role, one of his actresses told me. Max von Sydow did just that in the early 70s, and he hasn't starred in a Bergman movie since. And even when Death now makes his appearance again, the knight refuses to be cowed by his impatient adversary. He refuses to give up, and in that lies one of the great strands of meaning in the Seventh Seal, this refusal to countenance defeat. As they light the fire, I'm reminded of the fact that this went out of control at the time they were shooting the picture. The smoke billowed over everything, and Bergman, on top of a high crane for a shot a little while on, was screaming, "Max, where are you?" Couldn't find him, and for weeks afterwards the residents were wiping the grime from their windows. And the knight doesn't want to admit that he sees only terror now in those eyes of the doomed girl. And it will take the squire to give voice to those fears when she's raised above the flames. The knight tries to close those eyes, to shut out their fear and disillusionment. And he knows now that she must burn. And the girl, of whom we have not seen much, rushes forward appalled, and all of them stare. The squire utters words that most people would agree is the truth, but the knight refuses to acknowledge it. Notice how neither looks at the other. Both look beyond each other, at the witch, and still the knight stubbornly refuses to give up. Who would think that Max von Sydow was only 26 years old when acting this part? His wonderfully gnarled features convince us without effort that Antonius Bloch really is in his 50s or thereabouts. And all he can do now is to ride off confused and in despair. And Bergman cranes round, and we see Death kneeling in the background as the witch dies. Back in the forest, Joff tries to keep alight the fire to ward off dangers through the night to come. Another typical little superstition of the Middle Ages. While the knight waits for his vital encounter with Death at the chessboard, Mia, by contrast to the pessimism of those around her, sings a happy, faithful song. Bergman works very closely with the same technicians and actors and actresses throughout the years, and as a result, this has bred an extraordinarily close-knit loyalty among them.
Kanske den yttersta dagen.
Den yttersta dagen.
And suddenly a terrible cry pierces the night, and Raval appears, stricken with the plague.
Håll dig där borta på andra sidan trästammen.
He's one of those arrogant Bergman characters who gets his comeuppance, like the bishop does in Fanny and Alexander. As I've said earlier, it's a kind of revenge that Bergman's taking on all those church people he had to obey when he was a small boy in Stockholm. And we'll see the squire's girl jump up and run to take water to Raval. But she's held back by the squire. It's hopeless, he tells her. But she troubles us because she's a kind of emblem of pure, unjudging goodness. She wants to help the man who would have raped her in the deserted village. And Raval, in the moment of death, can find no comfort from his superficial beliefs. He never has had faith, even though he preached to others that it was essential to have it. Another superb composition, with Lisa and her husband up at the top left of the frame as the squire and the girl talk in the foreground. And as Raval gives up the ghost, a ray of moonlight will brighten the glade. But in fact, it was a ray of sunlight that happened to come out just by good fortune as they were shooting the scene on the back lot. If we're to believe Bergman, that is. And Death stands there, ready to pursue the game. He immediately takes the Knight's Queen, the most vital piece on the board. And at this point, Joff sees Death. He's the only other person, apart from Block, who is able to see Death, with his visionary, almost extraterrestrial quality.
Mia.
Vad är det?
Jag ser något hemskt. Något som jag
But
ständigt
Mia
kan tala om.
can't. He's alone, she'll say of the night.
Ja, det ser jag också. Det är väl inte så förskräckligt hemskt.
Ser du inte vem man spelar med?
Han sitter där ensam. Du får inte skrämmas
Nej,
där.
nej, han är inte ensam.
Vem är det då?
Döden. Han sitter där borta och spelar med döden själv.
And Joff realizes that they must leave at once.
Vi måste försöka komma undan.
Inte kan man det.
Vi måste försöka. De är så upptagna av sitt spel. Om vi är så av helt tyst märker de oss inte.
The Knight catches sight of them and knows that at all costs he must stall Death.
Det är ditt drag, Antonius Block.
This symbol of the chess game was taken by Bergman from the frescoes in the churches in Sweden he'd visited with his father. And it's also a marvelous dramatic symbol.
Döljer du något?
Ingenting undgår dig, eller hur?
Ingenting undgår mig.
His position on the board now is hopeless, so there's only one ruse left to the Knight.
Jag är ängslig, det är sant.
But it's a very clumsy one. And naturally enough, his ploy fails because Death remembers how the pieces were. But actually, the joke is a little bit on Death in this scene, because while the Knight is doomed to lose his match, he has the satisfaction of knowing that those brief few seconds have enabled Joff and Mia's wagon to trundle away to safety. You are mate at the next move, says Death. But the Knight doesn't care anymore, because he has achieved the one gesture, the one significant act that all that time ago in the church he spoke of as being the object of life. And this is the third and final encounter at the board between Death and the Knight. And the Knight says, "You will reveal your secrets." And Death responds, "I have no secrets." So you know nothing. Then Bergman slowly closes in on Bengt Ekeroth's mask-like face, and his eyes expand to reveal a total blackness. It's one of the most unsettling images in the entire movie. The storm gathers, the light grows more lurid, and the sense of apocalypse becomes more and more emphatic, whipped up by the music. The Seventh Seal, of course, takes its title from the Book of Revelations at the end of the Bible. So while the film isn't a precise replica of what Revelation says will happen at the apocalypse, the spirit is absolutely spot on. We can also see Bergman's marvelous music background, the way he can construct all this, not just the music itself, but the rhythm of the cutting, like some great dramatic score.
Mordängeln som går förbi oss, Mia. Mordängeln. Och han är mycket stor.
Känner du vad kan?
And as the storm rages, the knight reaches his castle. Home at last. Bringing with him this curious little band, the squire, the seemingly speechless girl, and the smith and his wife. And it's interesting to reflect as we watch this rather imaginative, tilted shot looking down at them, how Bergman achieved, on a budget of $150,000, effects which are really just as good as any of those in the Hollywood movies being made at that time, things like the Ten Commandments and the latter-day CinemaScope movies, which were really very trashy and the effects of which seemed very wooden. Bergman's Middle Ages, it strikes me, are wholly authentic. And we'll also see a typical Bergman technique here as people come into close-up. Notice how the girl comes towards the camera here, into close-up, almost forcing a confrontation with the spectator. And the same's going to happen with Max von Sydow in a moment here. He comes towards the camera. And there, over by the fireside, stands the wife of Antonius Bloch. Note the weariness and finality expressed in that gesture of her tossing a log on the fire. This poignant reunion rivals the scene on the hillside in its elusiveness, in its emotional power. She recognizes her husband immediately, but he scarcely recognizes her. "Don't you know me anymore?" she asks. And this is a point where Bergman writes with the utmost economy. No embroidered dialogue here. This was Inga Landgren, another regular actress with Bergman at Malmö, who appeared in some of his early films and in Brink of Life, but very little thereafter. And the knight says, "It's over now, and I'm a little tired."
Det är slut nu. Och jag är lite trött.
Ångrar du din resa?
Nej. Jag ångrar ingenting.
It's not only a coming home one feels, but the end of the road for the knight. The journey more than the arrival has mattered. Now all he wants to do is to sleep.
Där borta står mina vänner.
Be dem komma in. Jag ska åka till morgonbad.
Och
At the table, the knight's wife reads from the Book of Revelations. The mood of a Last Supper is there, without any undue emphasis on Bergman's part. No formal grouping, as in Buñuel's Viridiana, for example. No attempt to conjure up or replicate the Leonardo da Vinci composition we all know so well from reproductions in galleries. He leaves it to the audience. And now Bergman begins to focus on this young girl. She begins to realize that the moment she has longed for, the moment of fulfillment, is at hand. She waits for death as though for a lover, with all the eagerness and expectancy that one associates not with death, but with life. Death will open a door, not close it, provide some passage to a brighter world.
Och den andra ängeln stötte i sin basun. Då var det som om ett stort brinnande berg hade blivit kastat i havet. Och tredjedelen av havet blev blod.
Någon där?
And of course the squire, to the end, is unable to see death.
Nej, herre. Jag såg ingen.
Or is he? Remember, he did see the dead monk on the hillside. Perhaps he has just sensed an evil presence without seeing the actual image. And now watch as Bergman withdraws his camera and heightens the expectation as one by one the heads turn towards the door. First the girl, then the knight, and the squire, and Plog, and Lisa, and the knight's wife. And suddenly, just as he has materialized so often in the film before, death is there, as rigid as a sculpture standing next to him. The girl advances, preparing herself for some utterance, and one by one they introduce themselves.
God morgon, edle herre.
Jag är Karin, riddarens hustru.
Trying not to ask for mercy, but simply to state the inadequacies of their lives.
Jag är smed till professionen och ganska skicklig om jag får säga det själv. Min hustru Lisa. Nik för den höge herren, Lisa. Är lite svår att tas med ibland och vi har haft lite kalabalik så att säga. Men inte värre än de flesta.
The knight has begun reciting his prayers, hiding his face from death, we notice, hoping against hope that some god will redeem him.
För vi är små och rädda och utan vetskap.
I det mörker där du påstår att du vistas. Där vi alla förmodligen
The squire mocks him.
I det mörkret finner du ingen som lyssnar till din klagan eller rör sig dina lidanden.
Mocks God
Dina
indeed,
tårar och speglade din likgiltighet. Gud.
and states what must be Bergman's own philosophy. Feel to the very end the triumph of being alive, he'll say.
Jag kunde fått en nört att laxera ut dina evighetsbesvär. Det tycks vara för sent. Men känner i alla fall den sista.
And when the knight's wife hushes him to be quiet, he says, I will be, but under protest. What a way to go.
Men under protest.
Now the girl drops to her knees. And finally, after one feels almost an entire life of muteness, summons the strength to say, it is finished. The words of Jesus Christ on the cross. And Bergman's dissolved to Mia's fresh and happy face in the dawn light. The storm is over. The physical turmoil one feels, mirroring the spiritual turmoil. And so they can continue their journey. But when Joff leaves the wagon, this ark of his little son safely in his arms, he glances back from the shore towards the hills and suddenly he'll see the dance of death.
Mia! Jag ser dem, Mia. Jag ser dem. Där borta på den mörka ovädershimlen.
And he reads out the names of the people. The Smith and Lisa. The Knight, Raval, Jöns and Skat. And there's been a lot of debate about this. Why isn't the Knight's wife there, for example? Raval seems to have taken her place. And the girl is not there either, which is perhaps to be expected because she's always had an otherworldly quality, a kind of spiritual grace. And the words spoken now by Joff come directly from the book of Revelations.
Bort från gryningen, en högtidlans. Bort mot de mörka land, medan regnet sköljer över deras ansikten. Tvättar deras kinder från tårarnas salt.
And Mia, who cannot see any of this, looks on good-naturedly and chides her husband. You with your visions, she says. Many years later, Bergman was asked at a press conference about his true feelings on death. And he answered, "I was afraid of this enormous emptiness. But my personal view is that when we die, and we go from a state of something to a state of absolute nothingness. And I don't believe for a second that there's anything above or beyond or anything like that. And this makes me enormously secure."